So this is using query for December 14, 2020. And the primary focus of this, outside of anybody's interest they want to bring up at some point in the call, is to have Chris walk through the NYC, Mapping NYC Capital Budget project, in which we're trying to crowdsource volunteers to help us tag the geolocations of New York City capital budget projects and build up an aggregated data set which we can map, that lets people explore the capital budget projects and their progress in their neighborhoods. Oh, I've got some more people coming in. So as those guests enter, if there's anything else on the you want us to cover or stuff query related, please drop that in the chat, and I can make sure to add it to the agenda. Any other things we wanted to make sure we covered?
Rob, I can get you an update on the work that we've been doing on Echo archiving as well at the end, if you're interested.
Yeah, that would be great. I saw that PR merged, but it would be great to have like the holistic update. Thanks.
Yeah, there are like 4 more, and so we can get into that after Chris talks through this project.
Cool, and I would just say, Chris, hang on a minute. It looks like Bayou is trying to join in a couple different ways.
Awesome.
Looks like we've got at least one of the person's account in. So Bayou and Alex, welcome.
Hi.
Good to have you.
Cool. Chris, do you want to jump in?
Yes, sure. Shall I kick it off?
Yeah, sorry. I was just making sure I had all the logistics in, but I think we are ready to have you take over.
Okay, here we go. I'm going to share screen. Let me share just this window for now. I actually do want to run a little live demo of my updating script, which is a fun query use case. So we'll just start with this. Okay, can you see my web browser?
Yeah.
Yep.
Cool. So yeah, for some background, so I'm Chris. I'm an outreach engineer here at Query, but a lot of the time it means I get some flexibility to work on some interesting data projects just to make new data exist, or maybe improve data exists in many cases, like we've done with the turnstile data, and to basically flex the query platform a little bit and see how it works with these different kinds of data sets. So I'm kind of like a user also of query in the context of all of this stuff. So this particular project came up. Actually, I'm trying to remember what the actual thing was recently that got it back into my radar, but this has been kind of a white whale that I've been working on for several years, professionally and just as a hobby. So going back to my time at the Department of City Planning, there was actually a major effort underway to map the capital budget so that we could have improved visibility over where New York spends these billions and billions of dollars. So I won't dwell too much on that, but there was no public data set created out of that. I think most recently what happened, and I think, I can't remember how I stumbled across these, but it might have been one of my students expressing interest in capital budget data in one of their projects this year, but they basically, there are new PDFs that came out that support the capital commitment plan, and the capital commitment plan is formerly published as a 4,000-page PDF, which is basically a bunch of screen dumps from an accounting system where the budget is planned. So that's a pretty lengthy preamble, and I'll give you kind of a quick example. This is like what a normal sheet looks like from the capital commitment plan. So this is actually, this is all capital projects underneath a specific budget line. So this budget line is PV-DN612, which is the East Harlem Arts and Education Local Development Corporation. And then below it down here are listed capital projects. So the problem with these is that you can actually have multiple budget lines for a single capital project. So even if you can decipher the numbers for city costs and non-city costs, that you see on the screen here, you may not be looking at the complete picture for a capital project because it could have gotten funding from some other budget line and show up elsewhere in the documents. So enter these sort of new PDFs. This is called the capital commitment, or sorry, capital, what is it called? Capital project detailed data is what these PDFs are called. And in here, we actually have a single page each capital project, which kind of gives a complete view that was not otherwise visible in the earlier PDFs. It's also a little easier to read. So you can kind of just go down the page here and say, this is, reconstruction of a carousel in Prospect Park. Kind of really important here that is not necessarily missing, but harder to find in the other PDFs is this community board served. So this is all the community districts that this project is supposed to benefit. So this one's in Prospect Park, so it's actually benefiting several. And those of you who are familiar with New York City data and community districts will notice that there's a pretty glaring typo here because the the borough code for Brooklyn is 3 and not 2. But this is consistent throughout the document. So this is actually supposed to say 300, 306, 307, et cetera. But what we can tell from here is pretty neat, is that there's a prior actuals, and then there's basically planned spending. So we can see that this project has had $90,000 of prior spending. It's got $78,000 planned in the coming fiscal year, and then $422,000 planned. So more to be spent than has been spent. And then the total here is actually more than the original budget. So there's some really interesting, interesting ways you can cut this to figure out, if it's in progress, how far along is it in terms of total spending? Is the total spending more than the original budget, et cetera. You also have these milestones, which are kind of much more easy to read because they just have these sort of simpler human readable dates. So this is just a month and a year, but there's an original and current, so you can basically see whether a milestone happened on time. So I haven't really dug into milestones or even much of the spending data, but I think the tasks at hand when we started this were to make, let's see, I'm going to scroll down here and basically scrape the data out of these PDFs and then come up with some very interesting maps. So we did that, and we basically pulled the data out of these PDFs. And like I said, the city actually does publish these as data sets, but they're missing some of the key fields that I showed you on that PDF screenshot. And most notably that it is the community board served. So as a sort of simple exercise to see what we could, what we can see given this community board served data, we basically made this small multiples chart or map showing where all these different cost categories or project categories are actually showing up in the data as far as communities that they're supposed to be serving. So you can see where we're doing trunk and distribution main line extensions. You can see the ones that have like huge coverage like this one, which are parks and playgrounds, which are kind of happening everywhere. And then there's a bunch that are only happening in a few small sections of the city. And then the caveat of this is that this is only the ones that actually list a local community district, one or more local community districts. So there's lots of projects that are not mappable because of that. So anyway, okay, I'm rambling on the sort of benefits of what we can do with this data set. But the last step I'll show you is that, we basically took one of them, like if you saw in the PDF, we only have the community district, but in theory, we can get a sort of more precise mapping for these projects. Which means, if it's happening in a specific library, we know where that library is. If it's happening in a public housing development, or if it's happening on the piers or whatever, we can come up with a much more granular geometry. So I took one community district and tried to map as best I could all of the projects. So again, this is only the ones that were mappable based on the description. So there's lots of ones that talk about buying trucks and computer equipment. Those are not mappable, but these are ones that are a little more concrete and that they're happening somewhere sort of physical. Usually are things like sewers and building improvements and things like that. So this is what it looked like, and this sort of got a little bit of energy and momentum around. Why don't we do the rest of the city? So to give you an idea of the numbers here, there's about 4,000 or so out of there's about 5,000 projects total scraped out of those PDFs, and there's about 4,000 of them that are in theory, associated with a community district under that community district served field, which means if we can get 4,000, if we can get people together to go manually look up 4,000 of these projects based on their descriptions and try and map them, we could come up with a map of the entire city. So enter Airtable. So what we've done here is put together, basically imported those 5,000 records. So if I look at, I'm going to click here on all projects, and you'll see there's 5,207, so about 5,000 total projects. And then what I've done here is been kind of recruiting on Twitter and saying, hey, who wants to help out? We also had a little call to action at the end of that blog post that I was just sharing. It said, hey, if anybody wants to contribute, this is kind of a, hands-on sort of manual geocoding effort. And the intent is that you like read the description of this and say, reconstruction of Queens Boulevard, phase 1. A point is probably not the best way to describe this project because it's probably linear because it's talking about Queens Boulevard, but somebody, was able to, actually this one was imported from a third-party data set, but this one, for example, says manual lookup by Z Kang, who's a civic tech person in New York who is, responsive to the tweet. And he looked up this one, which is, let's see what it says, Main Street sidewalk widening. So that seems pretty vague, but if you know anything about New York and you know that this is serving Queens Community District 7, that's Flushing Main Street. So he was able to find a geometry for that. So if I click on this, so basically what I've been doing is if somebody takes on a community district, I put them on this little tracker, which a bunch of people on Twitter have responded. And, we've basically I've been kind of tasking out community districts. There's 59 of them, and you can see how many we've got assigned so far. So we're, less than halfway assigned and definitely less than halfway complete. I then send people this little instruction manual that tells them what to do. So let's see, scroll down here. So it says, yeah, if you were assigned Manhattan Community District 6, look in the left side of the Airtable and you'll find a little filtered view. And then basically people are going through and, taking their assigned area. And then, so these were looked up by Steve Romalewski. And they're going down the list and just kind of Googling, each one of these things as best they can, and then dropping a lat long into here. So that's kind of where we are. And if I click on this geocoded total, we're at 940 records so far, like I said, out of about 4,000 that we need to get the entire city done. So this has been a lot of fun and has just been kind of a fascinating little low-tech crowdsourcing effort to try and get this done. It's definitely not perfect, and it's definitely, there's going to be probably people that challenge, where these geometries, end up. But I think that's kind of the beauty of Query also, is that we can have some version control around this. So, we can know sort of when things changed and what they changed to, or at least have sort of concrete hashable versions that we can refer back to as we make updates. So that brings me to the next thing I actually want to show here is that I have, written a little script that pulls down the data from this Airtable, which I can run on demand. And I've been doing, every once a day at least, but sometimes more than once a day. And I can just, with one execution of the command, it'll actually pull it down and commit and then push it to Query Cloud. So if I go to, let's go to query.cloud, and I will show you, should have just been pushed this morning. Yeah, NYC Capital Project Detailed Data Geom. So I haven't really added a README or anything to this data set yet. It's just I'm just kind of dumping it into Query for now. But you can see that there are 6 commits that I've made over the last 6 days. So we look at the history. Yeah, all of these have the same not very helpful commit message, which that's my fault, and I'll fix that in the future. But you can see how often I've been sort of updating these. And the last update was 3 hours ago, which was this morning, sometime after our morning meeting when I said, okay, I'm going to update this data set. So there actually have been some changes since then. So what I'll show you right now is actually how I can run a little script that will update this. So give me just a second. I'll share my terminal window. And let's go to data story scripts / NYC Capital projects, geocoding. Okay, so I've got a little node script called Airtable-sync.js. All it does is talk to the Airtable API, which actually puts out JSON. So it kind of rearranges the JSON back into a CSV, saves it to the file system, and then does a query save command using our query JavaScript library. So I can just run node Airtable-sync.js. and it's going out and grabbing the latest data, which has a bunch of changes, which I think Eric just made, actually. So now you get to see them get archived for all eternity in IPFS and query. And there it is. So it's done. And let's stop share. And let's go back to Chrome. And if we reload, we'll see that it was updated just a few seconds ago. And we have, what does it tell us? 5,000. Well, the number of rows didn't change, but the number of completed latitudes and longitudes changed. So, I mean, that's, I think, what I have to present. I think there's been probably more enthusiasm than I expected on Twitter for this little project. And I think this has been kind of a nice little combination of hacked together sort of simple low-tech solutions to try and get a bunch of people organized in a common effort. And I think, given maybe a couple more weeks of this, maybe people will be more productive over the holidays with some downtime. We can actually get closer to like a complete picture, and that will open up all kinds of interesting analyses and mapping of these capital projects.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Chris. So if you're watching this and you're interested in participating, I'll include a few links in the description, but also just feel free to reach out to us in all the different ways we make available. I had one question, Chris, which you can answer as bluntly or politically as you want, but like you said that this is a data set that like you've danced around or has been in your worlds, different worlds you've operated in for a number of years. Can you talk about some of the interests that like who might be driving to have this data generated and who might stand to benefit by not having it as public? It's all public data, but.
Well, I mean, I think it's just that I don't know that anyone necessarily is twitching their mustache, and enjoying the fact that this is opaque. Maybe some people are for nefarious reasons, but I doubt it. I think it's just much more, this is just kind of a byproduct of complexity, and there are various actors involved in how the budget gets formulated and how monies are allocated. There's an entire process where community districts are supposed to weigh in and provide their statement of needs, and then the Department of City Planning receives it, and then all of this ends up being passed along to agencies, and then they weigh in on what they can afford. And there's all kinds of other different levers that they can play. There's also borough presidents and community, borough presidents and council members actually have some discretionary spending that they can do, so they can sort of bless like different cultural institutions and make sure that they get money for like dance programs and elderly programs and things like that. Then there's also what was I going to say? There's a few. I mean, there's lots of different sort of buckets of money and people that have different levers for how these things can get allocated. So I think what we're really going for here is just sort of leveling the playing field and saying like anyone should be able to at least come up with like some rudimentary picture of what's going on in their area without having to pour through PDFs. So I think that's one angle, is just sort of the curious / general interest taxpayer who wants to just know, and you just really can't do that very well right now. I would say like Brad Lander is a city council member, for example, who he puts up web maps on his website of capital projects going on in his district. Not all districts have this. So it's very helpful, and it's just something that has been kind of something that staffers in his office have had to kind of pour through all this information to make it clearer, and like that's helpful, but not helpful for the city. There's also different agencies that have their own sort of capital project maps. So Parks has one that you can go check out. So the kind of everybody's kind of taken their own little approach to this that may be helpful for their purposes, but definitely is not necessarily looking at the big picture, or looking at the holistic sort of citywide picture. There's also like the New York City Map official app. It has a capital projects layer, but it's only the big projects, right? So you click it on and you can see like massive projects where we're spending a lot of money, but all these little things where we're spending, $500,000 here and there fall through the cracks. So I think, what we're shooting for is just sort of like a data set that can be, used for lower level micro, local analysis. It can also be used for sort of larger level aggregations. And as I said, this, the data does exist, but as it's published by the city, it's a little out of date and is not up to date with the PDFs. And it's also just missing some of these key fields, especially that community board served field from what I saw. So that was a very long-winded response, but I hope I painted a little picture of who's involved in some of this stuff.
Cool, super helpful. Anybody got any questions? I also want to put anybody on the spot, but in case you volunteered and have any feedback about your experience or how easy it was or hard it was or fun it was or boring it was, I'd love to hear that too.
Also, if you contributed, thank you so much.
Yes.
Greatly appreciated. The fact that we're at like 940 records as a group is pretty incredible. When did you kick this off, Chris? Like last week?
I think Wednesday, maybe. So I've done 2 community districts myself, and then the rest have all been volunteers. So thank you for those who have done some work on this and contributed and are on the call. It's kind of amazing to see like humans actually show up to do something like this, which is kind of fun.
Yeah, it's great.
Can anybody comment on weird stuff that they learned or found or things they couldn't geocode or anything like that? I think that might be fun for others who haven't really seen the data yet.
Yeah, I think we've geocoded probably about like 20 of them, but there's a few spots where descriptions that are given in, you can definitely tell it was user inputted. So some of them were kind of hard to figure out. And also there were like some places like for a park, for instance, they might have the left side of the park and the right side of the park streets. So it's kind of, to decide like whether or not that geometry should be on the left side or the right side, or maybe put in the middle. I think you'll probably find some interesting stuff on that pace. In this case, I actually just picked one side of the park, but I feel like maybe the middle might be better off. But yeah, just from my experience, it was really fun kind of looking through it, and definitely takes an eye to do this and in familiarity with the neighborhoods too. I feel like that was by having my own spot in Greenpoint, I knew some of the places were, and then you can actually tag them from that regard as well.
Awesome.
Yeah, that's great feedback. That kind of bolsters my inspiration to kind of reach out to specific people who live in these communities to have them help with us. We've had some partnerships with organizations that operate in different parts of the city, so I'm kind of eager to ramp that up and reach out into some of the places that we haven't filled out yet. But that's really helpful advice.
Yeah, I think it speaks to the fact that like you can't adequately describe these things spatially all the time with a point geometry, and like that's especially with some of these things that are like major sewer construction projects. And there is actually there's a public layer of capital projects that the Department of Design and Construction they're Department of Design and Construction projects, but the layer is published by NYC Do It. So those are all just kind of includes every single little street vector for where these like sewer projects are happening, which I took a centroid of them and brought those in sort of as a bulk import later part of last week. So that was a couple hundred. Maybe no, it was actually less than that. It was like 150 projects. But anyway, like that's the kind of thing where it's like, yeah, like do we want to describe an entire neighborhood with a geometry, or is a point good enough? I think we have the rest of our lives to debate that, but it would be wonderful to just at least get, some kind of educated guess point geometry on the map so that we can at least start talking about these things. So I think that's the first step.
I'm finding that I have to often Google outside of the maps in order to get the results that I need.
Mm-hmm.
In order to get some of the results, such as some of the college campuses, they just indicate a building A, but that's not on maps. You have to go to the college website to get that.
Exactly. I found the same thing with the Brooklyn Academy of Music. There's also a local development corporation associated with them. So there's nothing in the Google Maps world about the Brooklyn Academy of Music local development corporation, but there's tons of little sort of local blogs and news articles about it. So I encountered the sort of same thing there.
Super interesting.
Yeah, fun stuff.
Rob, you raising your hand there?
I was just looking at this, and this is a little far afield and speculative, but I think this also forms a real interesting use case for, I know things you've talked about in the past about eventually getting to some kind of linking, and being able to have or organize other sort of community built data sets around these with like additional useful info or anecdotal info people know about these projects that are not meaningfully described like in this list of dollars and time milestones. Which obviously makes sense to like keep separate from like the canonical like basic data and then like additional useful things, but it's also a really great case for being able to keep those separate and reference back through query would be really cool. But that is far afield from what you're doing right now and like very future speculative, but it would be very cool to like see that eventually enabled.
Right, and this project ID is should be the thing that can help you join all these things together. And just for example, like I told you, I bulk, not really a bulk import, but I brought in a bunch of things that were centroids of more complex geometries for like sewer and road projects. And that data set also had a bunch of extra fields that are not included in this. Like this, this one comes directly from the source system that all the budget, all the money is accounted for in citywide, which means it's definitely looking at a completely different picture, than everything else. It's about moving money around, and as these things go lower down into the agencies, they become more human scale, and they actually start getting, names applied to them and other, project specific information attached to them that is not relevant or not really important to be tracked when you're doing it at the city scale. So there's tons of different opportunities for like joining up all this other little nuanced information. I think somebody just added something here. Anyway, yeah, excellent feedback. Thanks, Rob.
And I think I'd add to what you're saying, Rob, just on the basis that the joinability that comes from lats and longs, right, means you can sort of move up and out in ways that you couldn't otherwise. We have a lot of groundwork to do inside of query for that, but and then in other ways, not so much work to do inside of query for that, which is interesting, right? Like it's possible today to write a transform script that uses the geocoding libraries to decide to do joins that way. You can also use SQL to just join on very precise stuff, which is super fun. We don't have SQL geometry or geospatial SQL, which now that I think about it would be really nice, but sounds like a lot of work. But
it's a lot of work.
Fantastic. Does anybody have any, this is a great chance to talk about this project, and we really want to reserve time for this. So if anyone has any other questions or thoughts on it, ways in which we can improve, please feel free to, we're not in any rush.
So, I mean, I think the Holy Grail, or at least the sort of short-term Holy Grail I'm chasing right now would be a web map where you can just, see this kind of view instead of having these horrible labels all over the place, where you can just kind of see the scale of magnitude of, costs of these projects. Remember the circles here represent the combined sort of already spent plus planned spending for the next 5 years. Some of these go much bigger than that and would have larger numbers that go well beyond 5 years. So there's so many different nuances and weird things you need to know about this. But I would love to just kind of have it all in one list, and then also complement that with a list of, a nice scrollable list and filterable list of all the things that aren't mappable. And then sort of sum all that up by different ways you can cut it. And then, what I would then love to do is, like Rob was saying, is have the community be able to literally, if this was a web app, for example, just append all these news articles so that when I find a project and all I have is like a description and a number and a few years that I know they'll be spending money on it, I can sort of bring that back into reality and say, oh, the community has submitted these 2 news articles, and it also showed up in the city council, during this hearing, and you can go watch people debate it. And then it also showed up in the bidding contracting system, so you can go see like which people were involved in, which entities were involved in like building the thing, so that sort of thing. So it just becomes a sort of like transparency multiplier. So anyway, that's what I would love to do with this stuff eventually.
Oh, I love Eric. Eric, do you mind reading your comment out just for the record? It's a great concept.
The comparison of the spend per household resident or / resident for each district. Because if you want to, I mean, for example, the Staten Island number looks a lot smaller than the others, but Staten Island has a much smaller population than the rest of the city. So the per capita spending could actually be, won't look necessarily as different. Also, it could be, if you run this through the demographics of each district, you can run maybe some information on the amount of equity being thrown around here.
Totally agreed. And like one of the earliest things that jumped out is like even that top line number is really interesting because there's so many like services that actually serve the city where the product is local, like that water treatment plant that's being built in the Bronx that is costing like billions of dollars over years. And like, could you, I know I'm adding more work onto this, but like if we can understand a generic categorization of some of these projects and say, okay, what's the capital spending? And then I'd love to be able to factor out projects like that are in fact citywide but are mappable. It'd be really neat to see some of that. But maybe that's not citywide. I don't know. I'm not a city planner and probably not qualified to answer this question.
I mean, I think the answer is always going to be it's complicated, and like even if you take the number and divide by the number of people and try and make any claim about equitability, I think you're gonna have a bad time. So it's a lot more nuanced than that, and like maybe if anything else, it also just like lends credence to the idea that like it's really hard to actually assign the benefits of any of these projects, right? You can't it's naive. It's a kind of naive view to say like only these surrounding community districts in Brooklyn benefit from the carousel improvements of Prospect Park, right? Like that benefits tourists, that benefits the entire city if you're willing to make a trip to Prospect Park. So it's like it's not. It's a very hard equation to start coming up with like the spatial benefits of a lot of these things. But maybe if you cut it certain ways, some things are a little more easy, cut and dry to analyze that way than others.
Indeed. Cool, Doug, welcome. So that you just joined recently. If you've got any questions about what we've published, just for your awareness, we recorded and we'll be publishing everything we've been talking about before this in case you want to watch that once the video ends, but welcome. Anything else from the crew? If not, we could turn a little bit more internally to query business. B5, do you want to talk a little bit about what you got for Rob?
Yeah. And so this is it's not related, but it's of a vein. So Rob is joining us just to give a quick update on what this project is. Rob and I are members of this organization called the Environmental Data and Governance Initiative, which works hard to try and sort of work at the intersection of academia, policymaking. Rob, do you want to explain the latest update of what EDGI is, just quickly?
I mean, if we're going for intersection framing, I would say like academia, activism, and governance. But basically, there's a bunch of different projects that are sort of about keeping track of what mainly the federal government does with data related to science and the environment and climate. So some of that is like monitoring changes to websites. So articles you've seen in the news about like the term climate change has been removed from, the DOE's website or whatever, like are based on reports EDGI does, but also doing research into like how things have changed to support the Biden transition team, knowing like what stuff got gutted in what way should they think about figuring out how to put back together, or projects specifically related to more open data, like trying to train people and make more accessible some of the government's open data, like I think Brendan's going to talk about. EPA has a big data set, but it is hard to use. And so EDGI has a project trying to teach people how to use it and to try and make it more accessible.
Yeah, Rob, do you want to talk more about ECHO? I think you should just take the lead on that, and I'll talk about our part of it after you've given the preamble, if you don't mind.
Okay. So basically, this is actually a very cool project. If you're interested, you can go to environmentalenforcementwatch.org, I think. But basically, this project is both trying to take data in this system EPA has called ECHO, which stands for the Enforcement and Compliance History Online database. It's basically EPA's database that brings together a bunch of data sets from different places about whether like industrial facilities, from the very tiny, like your local auto body shop, all the way up to like a giant Dow chemical refinery. Any of those facilities that have license to like manage dangerous chemicals, there's a whole reporting system for how they have to monitor and report those chemicals getting released, like either leaking into the air or into the local water stream or whatever else. And so this database has information about, usually quarterly, about how those companies are complying or not with their particular permits limits. And then that gets used by the EPA to determine like how to check up on certain companies or where to send investigators and things like that. And so it's publicly accessible, but it is complex to use. There's a nice online interface, but it only covers like the last year of data, even though the data release covers, you know, like 12 or 15 years of data. And so we want to teach people how to make better use of it and make it easier to get at, because the only way to get that data right now is to download a giant pile of like 20 different zip files that then have several CSVs in them sometimes. And so we want to, you know, create a clear data dictionary, figure out how to link those together for people, teach people how to make use of it. And additionally, would be wonderful if it were available in a clear data-focused platform like Query.
Perfect. Thank you. What a lovely handoff. And so for our part, that's kind of where Query comes into the picture, is trying to make this sort of archival available in a way that we can sort of apply our sort of traditional chain of custody. You know, the nice thing about Query is we have version histories, but we also have a much higher degree of repeatability to a lot of our work. Chris demoed today the script for pulling from an Airtable. You can sort of use that as part of the audit trail, if not directly, at least indirectly, to sort of point to the integrity of the work. And it's, as we saw recently with the New York Times starting work that Chris was doing, it can make for like higher caliber, citable, useful information. And so in this case, what we'd like to do is like start to try and get Query to be useful for this exact use case of ECHO, where we're both archiving raw data as a starting point, and then ideally moving towards the cleaning up information and sort of injecting as a more useful component. As far as I understand it, talking with Rob, there's sort of like basic workflow right now is there's a script that runs X number of times, pulls data down, dumps it into a Postgres database, and then makes that available in other places. And so what we'd like to sort of at least do for now is start sidecar just archiving the exact same data, right? Which for Query actually represents a new set of challenges. For us, some of these data sets generally clock in at around 10 gigs per vintage, is sort of the size that we were seeing for a lot of the like baseline data that we were sent to archive. Biggest data sets that we put into Query before some of this, before some of the work that we undertook to be able to take on this project, Query was kind of capping out at around 4 or 5 gigs you could do, and it really depended on the speed of your machine, because Query had some inefficiencies in the way that it actually ingests data. And so for the first time, we had like a very real reason to figure out how to scale up the amount of data Query can both ingest and then move around. And then we had to sort of finally make good on a promise that we've had a long time ago of Query.cloud currently has an upload limit. You can't give Query.cloud a 10 gigabyte data set for free, because if everybody did that, we would be in a lot of trouble and our bills would be very high. And so we need another mechanism on top of this, which is a special place called a remote that anybody can set up, but we actually have to sort of go through the process of both setting one up, getting it set up in a highly sort of like available fashion so that it can host specifically this data, and then we need to permission it so that this data can be useful and available to anybody who wants it, but has a different set of access control than what Query Cloud has. Specifically, only certain accounts should be able to upload to it. And so for that, I'm happy to report that over the last 6 weeks, we've taken the performance of Query from being basically consuming as much memory as the size of your data set to while saving to at most 130 megabytes, which is a really fun decoupling. We did that by making everything inside of query on the save path streaming. And so that meant switching to a probabilistic data structure for calculating statistics. We also added, we actually managed to make it faster and add features at the same time, which query now calculates the stats of your data set as it's going, which is powering a new feature called change reports that we have a release coming forth on in the future, sometime soon. Yeah, and then the next hurdle we had to cross was actually the moving data around, for which we actually found a number of bugs inside of a couple of upstream dependencies that we had to make that go from consuming as much memory as the size of your data set down to, we now have it in like the 30 or 40 megabyte range. And so all of this is sort of, I'm happy to report that all of this is working. What our last steps are debugging our cloud installations. Moving around 10 gig data sets is a really great way to stress test all of your systems. In the world of containers, for the people, as a small sidebar, you need to make sure that you make containers that have at least 10 gigs of scratch space on them if you want to be able to upload 10 gigs worth of data, because you need to make a temporary file at some point. So fun adventures in making all this work, but we actually have a really nice setup coming together that will both allow automated archiving of the existing data set, and we've now scaled query to the point where it can really reasonably handle 10 gig data sets, and it can handle it on any reasonably modest, reasonably modern computer that is, 2012 forward, which I think has been really, really fun to see, and it's been really motivating to sort of say, hey, we need to get query moving quickly because we want to be able to do this echo data. Just to give some offhand benchmarks, doing a 10 gig data set on my 2014 MacBook Pro takes like 28 minutes. And that's mainly to the time that is taken to hash all of the data to calculate that giant checksum. In the process, the other thing that we did is we switched to something called a Raven chunking, which again, this is a bit of in the weeds details, but the way in which it helps is it means query actually naturally deduplicates data. And we did a bunch of tests with without this feature and with this feature, and the size of the data set version stored on disk dropped by 1/3 for the echo data. So data measured in 2 megabyte blocks. Without Raven chunking, it was 33,000 blocks. With Raven chunking, it's 23,000 blocks, which is a crazy space savings and should affect a lot of these benefits translate to every data set inside of query. And so as we get up into bigger data sets for any other purpose, these benefits sort of come across. And so lots of really fun stuff has come out of the project of trying to get up into this 10 gig range. And we're really excited to sort of start seeing that. The first thing we'll see with this stuff once it's up and running is you'll now have change reports. You can actually just see, hey, this column moved, the median of this column moved by X. This number of rows changed by, there's a whole bunch of stats we actually have, and I won't just run them off. But Rod, that's our big update. We're like inches from the finish line on pushing this. I've done 2019, 18, 17, and the 2020 vintages so far. And obviously 2020 is the most interesting to follow because it is still changing theoretically, but even the old ones have been interesting. I have witnessed changes in 2019 since we've been archiving it. So hopefully we can go back and look at some of that. But yeah, I don't know, do you have any questions, Rob, on that? And if anybody has any questions on this, I'd be happy to talk through technical details, but this is the using query call. So we're really trying to be in service of this use case of archiving echo data.
That sounds amazing. Also, I was watching one of the calls from a few weeks back. So that's the latest I know about the change report thing, and it looks amazing. I have maybe like some UI feedback, but I don't even know how it's changed since then. And just having that feature looks incredibly cool. And performance benefits also sound unbelievable. So like awesome work for all of you. Like that's great. Thank you.
Oh, fantastic. Yeah, Casey, do you have any updates on the UI? Or, I mean, we've been working on this a bunch other than.
Specifically, I mean, I also don't know the last update specifically Rob has had about remote UI, but we made a big leap forward, I guess you could say, on our remote UI. Previously, it was just like a list of, basically the goal is when someone runs a remote, if they make this endpoint available to the public, you can go and you can have a graphical user interface of what's on the remote and be able to, if you want them to, be able to export straight from there rather than having to, have some other, email them a PDF of something or whatever, the CSV, they can just go and grab the data straight from the remote. Even if they aren't necessarily part of the query ecosystem. It's just like another way that you can quickly and like efficiently be able to pass on this information. So yeah, it's based on the desktop. A lot of the stuff that's inside desktop right now is mirrored in, is mirrored in the remote UI that you're all seeing right now. And yeah, so.
How do I unmute? Am I still muted? No, can you hear me?
Yep.
Sorry. Yes. I'm not going to click this 8.77 gigabyte 2019 because I think it's going to make everything explode. But this is just a website. And so these are remotes now that you can look at that anybody should be able to go to and download directly from. So this is an upload of Pluto that we're using to test. And so now you can just see all this from a web browser, which is some of what Casey was talking about. Sorry to interrupt you, Casey. You can narrate this while I click.
Yeah, and unlike cloud, because this is coming directly from your remote, someone can iterate through the whole data set. Cloud only gives you a preview. You can iterate through the whole data set, which, yeah, and stuff is breaking.
Demo guys.
But yeah, so when, I think we'll probably do another level of polish on this once we have a lot of the changes that B5 has been working on to get query in a better state for larger data sets. He's already accomplished much of that, but I think there's another round that he's trying to get in. We'll probably do another polish of this to get it even more useful.
Yeah.
Also, because it's based on desktop, we might be able to get some sort of change reporting in here as well, which I think would be really, really cool. So for those of you who haven't been on our last two calls, we have our newest feature that we're working on is to get a change report in desktop, so you can look at a specific version, click view changes and be able to get a overview of what's changed between the two dataset versions. So that I think we'll be able to fold nicely into this remote UI as well. So it's, we're pretty excited. It's pretty cool stuff. Some cool stuff.
See if I can pull up a change report demo. This is, you're witnessing a lot of sausage getting made, but yeah, anybody have any questions on change reports or anything of the like? Actually, Casey, what's the name of your branch that's the latest?
Solid question.
While you look up that up,
fix_changes.
Okay.
Nice and straightforward.
Anybody have questions on change reports? We'll see if we can demo the latest of this while we're at it. Okay, but yeah, change reports is for those who aren't in the know. We're hoping to get this to users as soon as we can. But just being able to see what changed between two versions, that's the real goal.
I have a question. What's the difference between a change report and a diff, Brendan?
So if you've ever used Git or any type of software version control, a diff is is a machine generated patch that can explain exactly the difference between two things. So here's a script to get you from version A to version B. With data sets, that is untenable. When you have 8 gigs of data generating a patch for it, it's not untenable. It's just really expensive to calculate. You can do it. But if you had, say, 250 million changes, like that's just really unreasonable to review. And so for us, we've come up with this concept called change reports, which is just a high level description of changes. What's a good example of one? Can I do that's FSI link? That's gonna be tough, but let's see if this one works. But we'll have this new, oh, I'm not on the right branch, am I? Dang it. Oh, no, I'm not in the right place. Sorry, everybody. But we have these change reports that are forthcoming. I guess we'll have to, I'm not going to waste everybody's time regenerating.
No, that just didn't have, that was just one that had no history. So there was no change report to show.
There's nothing to review. Thank you. I'm sorry. I need a real change history. How many commits? Recovered. Crypto OSS example has changes. Do we? Oh, this is JSON, so that's not going to work. This is all very, very new. I can just do this, can I? Data set test. That sounds, yeah, of course. This is apologies. Developers don't always name their data sets very well, but we have this new tool called change reports, which will show you exactly what changed. And so we can see that here the file size dropped by 2 kilobytes. We have a forthcoming UI refactor for this, so what you're seeing is not final by any means. But we can see shifts in the column statistics. So the mean just completely flipped out on this change, which is understandable because I think this is all dummy data intended to try and break things. But you get the idea that query can very quickly and efficiently calculate for you a high level description of what changed from one version to another and generate charts for you, which are not being showed here because, again, this is insane data that doesn't actually mean anything. I'm pretty sure this is like, yeah, intended to be. But you can view changes between the two versions, and it sort of makes it a little easier to get your head around what has shifted in your data set. The UI refactor that we're bringing forward is just turning these very important figures into a table so that you can very quickly see, oh, these are the changes. And for columns that don't have changes, it will show up much more obviously. But yeah, it's kind of where we're at, what's coming down the pipe. I'm not going to take up too much time beyond that, but we'll take that and eventually that will land inside of the web UI. And so in some time next year, you will live in a world where you can say, hey, here's this echo data and here's a new version of that echo data. And I know before I even download that 9 GB data set that the only thing that's really changed is 25 rows have been added, which we think is the holy grail that we would like to see. All that will be happening on a remote that you, should you so choose, could run for yourself with a Raspberry Pi plugged into a wall in your house, or you could run it, or you can talk to us and we will set one up for you and connect it to the cloud and give you a subdomain. But yeah, this has kind of gotten sidetracked, but Rob, do you have any questions? And beyond, after that, we can close this up.
Cool. Well, that was an action-packed hour. Thank you for Chris for demoing and for all of you guys, the new faces for joining us for this. And yeah, like we said at the top, if you're interested in either of these projects, reach out to us and we'd love to have your help, especially with the geotagging over the next couple of weeks. Spread the word. All right, thanks everybody.